And with that, the 2021 season comes to an end. Good night. And then the video cuts to me going out into the ballpark, into the bowl, the seating bowl, and I had our video board guy shut the lights off, and we filmed it a few times where I'm looking out on the field, and as I'm looking out, the light shut off. And it was just a TikTok. I mean, it was a video. Didn't think anything of it. I post it.
Hi again, and we welcome you in here to episode 2 here on STAA, and we're joined by the Padres pre- and post-game host, Sam Levitt. Sam, thanks so much for taking some time. I know that you probably wouldn't be in this position had you made the club baseball team at Northwestern. What's the scouting report on Sam as a baseball player?
Sam as a baseball player, good defensive outfielder, I would say, probably above average as far as the defense. Could not hit at all. I mean, I couldn't hit anything, fastball, off speed. That's an interesting way to start the conversation. The club baseball tryouts that I didn't make at Northwestern, didn't make the team, which then brought me to the student radio station because, Michael, that's a Sam Levitt deep cut right there. Nobody's asked me about the club baseball team in a long time, but high school, Sam, the baseball player, good defender, not much of a hitter at all.
How much were you influenced growing up by sportscasters to have that kind of be that secondary option and want to get into that when you got into college?
Yeah, I would say my story wasn't maybe the prototypical story that a lot of the individuals who get into our business seem to have, which is being enamored by sportscasting at a really young age, having a toy microphone or a fake microphone in front of the TV at 7 years old. That really wasn't me. But I always loved sports and I love sports radio. I grew up in New York. I grew up a huge baseball fan, and I would listen to WFAN in New York. I would listen to the Mets on the radio. I would listen to Mike and Mad Dog or Steve Summers at night. And I always had a connection to the radio and would stay up late listening to Steve Summers on WFAN after Mets games. And I remember listening to Mets Extra and listening to Bob Murphy and Gary Cohen back then on the radio, and then Howie Rose, and those were all the guys that I really looked up to as I was a kid. But I wouldn't say that I sat there thinking that I'm going to do this one day. I would say that I was a really big baseball fan. I love listening to sports on the radio. I love listening to sports talk. And in retrospect, I think that played a really big role in what I got into. But to your point in your original question, I did not show up at Northwestern despite it having a terrific journalism program. I didn't show up there, number one, in the School of Journalism, or really knowing that that's what I would go on to do. I kind of fell into it almost. And I think when I look back on it now, understanding what I enjoyed as a kid, understanding that I was always listening to the sports on the radio, and I loved waking up to WFAN, going to sleep to WFAN. I think in hindsight, it's pretty obvious that I always had a passion for it, but it just took me a little while to get there. But to your original question, really, I mean, I grew up in New York, so it was people on WFAN. It was certainly the Mets broadcasters because I grew up a big Mets fan. Howie Rose, Gary Cohen, Bob Murphy, list goes on. And still to this day, I look up to those broadcasters, and I also am lucky enough to call them colleagues and friends now as well, which is pretty cool.
A big reason why a lot of people know you is for your social media, but it kind of started the Gateway Grizzlies. Brandon Thomas hit a grand slam. It hit his own car. You posted that. What do you remember about that moment, that time, and not really knowing what quote blowing up on social media was at that point?
I like this. You're bringing up a lot of good stuff that people don't normally ask about. That was a very viral tweet, very viral moment. I guess you could argue that was my first ever viral hit on any platform. And it was when I was with the Grizzlies, like you said, one of our players, Brandon Thomas, hit a grand slam. I think it was a grand slam that hit his own car in the parking lot beyond left field. And I put out the tweet, and next thing you know, he's on Sports Center and the story's all over the place. And I had people, texting me about my tweet, and the Grizzlies got some good national spotlight. So that was pretty cool for the team, for Brandon, for myself, obviously, being an independent league team in St. Louis, the management there loved that we were getting that kind of exposure. Um, and it was cool. It was a really cool cool moment for the team, no doubt. So I guess, when I look back on it now, that was a good early example of the power of social media, the power of posting, the power of content, the power of never being afraid to put something out. And when I look back on it now, that's certainly one of the early viral things that I ever posted, and it was a pretty cool moment for everybody.
One of the more viral moments as well didn't happen on your account. It happened on your brother's account, Mike. Yeah, I think when I looked at it the other day, over 2 million views on it, you reenacting a dance with your brother. How did that kind of spurn a little bit of the social media love to see the reaction that got?
I've got to give you a lot of credit. These are very specific memories and things and I've done a number of these interviews, and nobody's asked me about this video ever. But the interesting part, Michael, is for all the stuff I've done on TikTok and Instagram now. Number one, I was not the original Levitt TikToker. The original Levitt TikToker was my brother, who, during COVID times, in 2020, he started posting, and my brother and I are pretty different. He's probably funnier than I am, and does a little bit more crazy content than I do. But we were both home at our parents' house in New York, and he had been posting on TikTok. And keep in mind, I didn't even have a TikTok account yet. So this is, I want to say, late summer, early fall of 2020. And he had an idea to recreate a dance that we did together at my bar mitzvah. And he did a great job. We relearned the dance. We had the original video from my bar mitzvah video of the dance, and he spliced it up in a way that was really, really, really good. It was really well done. We kind of crushed the dancing, and it went pretty viral at that time, and that was on my brother's account. So, again, all these things I think about in hindsight now. I didn't really necessarily understand TikTok at the time at all, other than the fact that he posted it and it was really popular. But it was a pretty cool video and a really funny video, and people seem to really like it. So you're right. That was my first ever viral TikTok. It was not mine. So when I talk about TikTok and I talk about all these different things I've done, I have to give a lot of credit to my brother Mikey, because he was the original Levitt TikToker, and that was a pretty great video. And I will say this: I didn't know much about TikTok at that time at all. If I had, what I would have said to my brother is, hey, we've got to find number one, we've got to find your bar mitzvah tape and do a dance from that. Then we have to find every angle we can at this. Before you leave this house, we have to go film 10 more and plan to put out one a week for the next 10 weeks, because we really could be the dancing brothers here. I didn't really understand that at the time, or how TikTok worked, or really the power of TikTok. But for a little bit, it was pretty viral. And believe it or not, of all the things I've ever posted, that still is probably one of the most, the most, the most, what word am I looking for here? I don't want to say the most viral thing, but like the most that people have reached out to me about. I was getting so many texts from people I grew up with that thought it was funny and cute and really creative, and I'm happy my brother and I could have that moment.
We've talked about some of these moments that kind of kick-started things, but I know that you've mentioned, going back to the days in the Cape Cod League, just posting highlight reels and stuff like that. Why did you think from a early start you decided that social media was a wave to try to produce content, not just personally for you, but for teams and to help expand brands?
I think it's a great point. And I think when I think about even my career now, posting on social media and thinking a little bit outside the box and really making it a priority was something, to your point, that I was doing all the way back when I was working for the Orleans Firebirds in the Cape Cod League. Now, it wasn't just me. It was a guy I'm still really good friends with, and Kevin Fitzgerald, Susie Milano, who is still I'm great friends with. I've been lucky with both of them to meet them when we were both working in the Cape Cod League, and we are still tremendous friends. So that's really a blessing. But one thing I think we all did when we worked in Cape Cod, on Cape Cod, was we really took pride in putting things online. Now, keep in mind, this is pretty early in the Twitter days. I don't recall us even really using Instagram. Certainly, we were using Facebook. I mean, at this point, this is over a decade ago. So the landscape's a little bit different. YouTube certainly was a pretty big thing by then. But we made it a real point to all our radio highlights went up online and on social media. Every interview we did went up online and on social media. We were very, very aggressive and consistent about putting things online. And we weren't the only team doing that. I remember the Chatham Anglers, they had a really, really good operation. And they were doing a lot of stuff that nobody else was doing on the Cape. And we really wanted to match that. We sort of viewed it as, hey, we're going to try to do what they do, and we're going to try to make our own version of it. So to your point, even back then, I think myself, Kevin, Susie, Matt Stepolkowski was our writer. We all saw the value in putting out content and doing things extra beyond just the broadcast every night. And I think it set for me a precedent that wherever I went, when I went back to school or when I had my first baseball job with the Grizzlies, that doing things outside just the typical broadcast were really, really important. And social media and video and being versatile and understanding that there's a lot more, I think, there's a lot more value you can bring to a team, to an organization, to a fan base than just broadcasting the games. And that's not to discount how important the game broadcast is. Of course, it's important. But I think as time went on, both in my career, but also just by the years as social media grew and the landscape evolved, I think it became simply more and more important that I was figuring out ways to provide value. So again, it's an interesting thing to look back in hindsight when I think about the way my career has evolved and then all the social media stuff that I think in a sense I was maybe thinking about it a little bit differently than others were even back then, or at least putting an emphasis on how important social media and video and providing value outside the broadcast, how important that all really was, even back in 2012, 2013, when I was on Cape Cod.
You just mentioned the dichotomy between broadcasting and having additional skills. What guidance would you give other sportscasters as they try to decide their next step in their career and try to bring value that is outside of just speaking into the microphone?
It's a great question, and I think it's really important, probably even more important, like I was saying now than it even was a decade ago. I think being versatile is really, really important. I think, obviously there are a lot of people that want to call games, and there are a lot of people that want these jobs, whether it be minor league baseball, whether it be in college athletics or beyond. And I think typically the people who have a real advantage to get those jobs, and I think this was true in my case, are people that can provide value beyond the broadcast. And I think a lot of people who hire for those jobs really value that skill set, maybe even more so than the broadcast itself. I'm not saying that's necessarily a great thing for the broadcast industry, because you do want employers and bosses who are going to value what you do on the broadcast side. And I was always very lucky, even in the minors, of having GMs who really valued that and having bosses who really value that. But you have to think about it a little bit from their perspective. When you apply, let's say, to a minor league baseball job and there are 200 applications for one job, what's going to make you stand out? I mean, a good amount of those people are going to call a game just fine. And the difference between you and another person, how you call a game, I mean, everybody's got their own taste, and those differences are, I think, in a lot of cases, really, really minuscule. So to me, it often comes down to what What do you provide? What makes you stand out? And that can be a number of different things. It could even be sales, right? I mean, that's something a lot of teams value. If you're a great salesperson, that may give you a huge leg up to get a job in a market or with a team where sales is going to be a component of it. That was never really, aside from 1 year when I was with the Grizzlies, that was never really something I had to do, luckily. But for me, at least, and I think this is where I can give advice to other people, being versatile was always really important. And what I mean by versatile is having the capability to do things on camera, to do things on video, to utilize social media. You made the point on Cape Cod, I was already doing those things. That continued as I went along. When I got to the Gateway Grizzlies, we were doing multiple sponsored segments per week on social media. I remember we would have the Budweiser Grizzlies Glance. We would have our Grizzlies Spotlight presented by, I can't remember the sponsor, where I do an interview per week with a player, and that would go up on YouTube. That would play on our video board. And in my 3 seasons at Gateway, I created not only a broadcast reel of calling games, but I also had this really extensive and I think creative video reel. And I know every step of the way this stuff helped. In Corpus Christi, when I got the job there, the number 2 job, I was working under a great broadcaster and guy in Michael Coffin. I know for fact that one of the things that really attracted them to me was that reel from the Grizzlies, was seeing all the different things I could do on video and social media and content wise, because they had a pregame show that they would have on the video board where that was a big part of the job, where it was about interviewing different people, being part of the community, having a personality. So that job was well beyond just calling games and being the number 2 broadcaster. So I continued to do those things in Corpus Christi. And then in Amarillo, that was a battle for a brand new job with a brand new team in a great situation. I was already in the Texas League, which certainly helped. But again, I know for fact, and you can ask the GM, Tony Enser, about it there. And I just saw Tony at the winter meetings that he always talks about it. It wasn't necessarily my play-by-play, even though I think it was solid at that time. Well, I should say I don't think it was very good at that time compared to where I'm at now. But it wasn't necessarily the play-by-play that got me that job. It was seeing everything else. It was seeing how I could take a new team and a new market that was looking to create content, was looking to do things a little bit differently, looking to make a mark. And I think they saw how I did things on the video and social media side, and and wanted that for them. Like, we took the same concept of that on-field pregame show and I brought it to Amarillo. I basically copied it from Corpus Christi, and they loved that when I came to the table with those ideas and some of the different things I could do. So I say all that to say, back to the advice part of it, that being versatile, and again, I use that word value, providing value outside of the play-by-play, I think that gives you a real leg up. So I would tell people, be versatile, have a wide skill set, know how to edit, know how to be a one-man band in most of my jobs, including in San Diego now. I mean, I'm about to go to spring training in a month where my job is very content-based and very social media-based. And yes, I do a lot of stuff on the radio and whatnot, broadcast-wise, but I'm a one-man band, essentially. So I still use a number of the skills that I developed a decade ago in my job now. So I think that versatility, understanding how to create value beyond the broadcast booth, I think that's so critical, and especially if you can show that off. The other thing I would say, and we may get to some bigger picture, more philosophical questions in this, and I know this is a really long answer, so I apologize, but I would also say this: understand that not everybody's path is the same. Right? I've had to do things or take, a strategy of being really versatile that maybe some other broadcasters, some other people in our business haven't had to do. And I'm not saying that as a negative at all. But, look, my path is my path. It may not look similar to somebody else's path. Maybe there's somebody else who has had even more success than me from a play-by-play standpoint, that has just called games and got great opportunities. And I say that to say your path is never going to be the exact same as somebody else's. And don't be afraid to be a little different, a little versatile, get into some different things, and accept that your opportunities may come a little bit differently or in a different way than somebody else's that you know or you went to school with or you've come up with in the business. So, be versatile and be open to getting creative and taking some different paths. Those would be my two big pieces of advice. I know, very long answer to say all that, but I think my own story, illustrates that in a pretty good way.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And one follow-up I have off of that is
Mhm.
how do you go about self-assessing? Not necessarily just your on-air tape and how has that evolved, but also how you self-assess the skill set that you have at that point so that you do get better during a 140 game season.
Yeah, I think self-assessing in any sense is really, really hard. I think it's important, but I think it's really hard. And the way I think about it, or just from my own story, is, when I was with the Grizzlies or I was in Corpus Christi, I thought I was so good. I mean, another thing, a piece of advice I would say to anybody watching, and it sounds really cliche, but I think it's incredibly true, is be where your feet are and focus on getting better. And I think the first 5-ish years of my career, that was not my number one focus. When I was with the Grizzlies, and I love the Grizzlies, I had a great experience there, but there was a part of me that was always focused on what was going to be next. When I was with the Hooks in Corpus Christi, wonderful experience there, but a part of me was always focused on what was going to be next. And I think when I got to Amarillo, I finally started to realize A, that I wasn't that good and I had a long ways to go, and that I really needed to focus on getting better. And had I had that mindset from earlier on, I think I would have got better more quickly. I think for a while I kind of stood in the same place, broadcast wise or skill wise. So I think self-assessing is hard because I think you can have blinders on for yourself. And I used to listen back to my tapes then and I thought I was awesome. And if I listen back to those now, I can't even do it because it's so bad. But at the time, if you would have asked me in 2015, 2016, when I was with the Grizzlies, I was horrible. And I thought I was the best. I mean, I thought I was so good. I thought it was way better than the level I was at. And the truth was, I wasn't. And I wasn't getting better as quickly as I should have because I wasn't focused on it. I bring that up to say that I think self-assessment is kind of hard. So I think it has to be a mix of you and what's in your gut and being honest with yourself. But I also think getting perspective from other people and coaching and help from other people is really, really important. I had a period of time where I worked with a great coach. Her name is Jill Montgomery. And, I feel like I improved a lot while working with Jill. Um, I think when you get consistent feedback from another place, from someone else, I think it just gives you so much more perspective. So, yeah, self-assessing is important. I think it's a little hard to do, to be honest with yourself, and that's why I always say, not that you have to work with a broadcast coach, but even if you just get feedback from other broadcasters, do it a lot. Send your stuff out a lot and ask them to be hard on you. You're not going to get any better if people are just, telling you how great you are. Ask them to be hard on you, pull out the different consistencies in each piece of feedback. Also understand that, everybody has a different opinion of everybody. This is a very, very subjective business. So that's what I would say broadcast wise. As far as like other self-assessing, as far as your skill set, I don't know that I have a great answer for that. I mean, when I think about like my editing skills, things like that, things that could put you a little bit ahead. Look, I've always been a very basic video editor. I don't know that I've had any incredible technical skills. Certainly when I talk about broadcast side of things, getting better on camera, getting better, in those elements, I think you should always be self-assessing. So, self-assess, but I think it's helpful to do it through the lens of maybe some people who can have a real objective view of what you're doing and where you're at. Because at least in my case, and others might disagree, I still don't trust myself when I watch stuff over, when I hear myself, because I think if you listen to yourself enough, you will think everything you do is amazing. And I will tell you with full confidence that when I was doing that back in 2016, 2017, I thought I was awesome and I was not. So I think you got to get objective feedback.
What have you learned about social media since you first started getting into it?
What have I learned about social media? I think it's great in some ways. I think it's super frustrating in some ways. I think you have to be careful with how much you rely on it in a number of different ways. Look, it's an amazing tool. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. I think we are living in a world right now where it opens so many doors for anybody. I think the playing field has been leveled out a little bit because you can, post something like you don't need to work for a big network or a big radio station or in a big market to to make a name for yourself, right? You can post things, and there are so many examples of it now. You can post things on TikTok, you can post things on Instagram, you can make a YouTube channel and have tremendous amount of success without ever being employed by a quote unquote traditional a traditional media company or a traditional outlet. And that's a beautiful thing. I think it's an amazing thing. Um, so I think it's really incredible in that way. I think, I think we all get a little too wrapped up in it at the same time, thinking that sometimes it's a little bit more important than it is, right? Than who's necessarily watching or reading it. So I don't know. That's a tough question. I mean, I think for me, I've learned to ignore any hate. I'm lucky I don't get a ton of hate, but I do. I mean, I get some. So, I think I've learned to ignore that, to understand that social media is not real life. Maybe that's kind of a good lesson. Is it's really important. It's certainly a big part of what we do and creates tremendous opportunity, but it's also not real life in a way, even though it kind of is. So I would say that that's a tough one for me to answer, but I'd say, I think you have to be able to, I've learned how to separate, you know, social media versus real life versus considering it's like sort of sometimes this necessary evil. And I think sometimes things would be a lot simpler if we didn't have it. But I think putting it in perspective is probably the biggest thing I've learned since I've started.
What role does social media play for sportscasters in today's world?
For me, I think it's really important. Again, I think even if you are not, and this is a difficult question because I think even if you aren't um, the biggest social media person, or it's not very natural to you to share like that or to put your opinions out or to create content. And I'll say for me, it's not always the most natural thing. I mean, I've put out a lot of videos about a lot of different things. And, you know, there have been plenty of times where I'm not really sure if I should put something out, not because it's controversial, but just because it makes me feel self-conscious to open up like that or to put something of myself that I look at and be like, I'm not really sure if people are going to like this or they'll judge this. Um, so I certainly understand that it's not for everyone, or at least it may not come natural to everyone to post in that manner. I would say if I'm speaking to somebody coming up in the business right now, with all that said, I would say you have to be doing it. I just, to me, I don't know how in 2025 you are trying to be a broadcaster, trying to come up in our business without trying to be active on social media, without trying to create an audience. I mean, it's just too valuable. I mean, think about how people consume content. I mean, how many people are on their phones all day or on social media all day? To me, I just think you're missing, if you're not posting, you're missing a real key component of what's going on right now. And I think the reality is like we can all live in this kind of imaginary world where, hey, it's, 30 years ago and there's just a few different outlets and a few different ways to do it. And like I said, with different paths and blueprints, there's not one way to do this anymore. Maybe, 3 decades ago, it was more of, hey, if you want to be a baseball broadcaster, you're going to work in single A and then double A and then triple A, and then maybe you'll get a job in the major league someday. That's just typically not how it works anymore. Whether it's baseball, whether it's teams, whether it's networks, it's just not. So I think it's really important. Like, to me, it's a must. You know, everybody probably doesn't think that. To me, I don't know how you would be coming up in the industry right now and not seeing the opportunity that social media presents and not participating in it. Now, hey, you know, you may make 100 TikToks and get, 50 views a TikTok. I'm not saying you're going to blow up on these platforms necessarily. I can't guarantee that, but I think you should be trying to be active at least. If there was a young broadcaster, let's say in high school or college or whatever, that was asking me for advice and they said, oh yeah, I don't actually have any social media, I would say to them, what are you doing? Like, you, you kind of have to. You're missing something that I think could be really valuable. And again, we talk about that word value. Well, one way you can create value is by having a big social presence and showing that you can do some different things. So, again, I know it's not natural for everybody, Michael, but to me, if I'm a broadcaster right now coming up in our industry, to me, it's a must. That's at least the way I view it.
I do want to talk about a short phrase that has helped a lot of people really summarize their years, and
Mhm.
it's X year has come to an end. Can you give me the origin story of why you even decided to post that in the first place and how things got rolling?
I can. It's a really interesting story. Well, it's not that interesting, but I think for most of the world, because they don't know the story, I think it answers a lot of questions. So when I was in Amarillo, this is 2021, and this was my first baseball season and year really posting on TikTok, right? So that summer, I had been posting different content about baseball and my job and broadcasting. And at that point on TikTok, I had maybe 200, 300,000 followers. So I did have a pretty sizable following already. I made a video in 2021 at the end of the season in Amarillo that was just a video, you know, basically signifying the end of the baseball season. It was just a post. I mean, it was just a video where I kind of acted out, the end of the broadcast and saying, and with that, the 2021 season comes to an end. Good night. And then the video cuts to me going out into the ballpark, into the bowl, the seating bowl, and I had our video board guy shut the lights off, and we filmed it a few times where I'm looking out on the field, and as I'm looking out, the light shut off. And it was just a TikTok. I mean, it was a video. Didn't think anything of it. I posted it. Later that year in the fall, some high school athletes, like, it was a little bit viral with like high school athletes using that sound for the end of their high school football season or basketball season or whatever it might be. But really no big deal. Just a little sound, little viral. No big deal. Didn't think much of it. So then the next summer, when I got to San Diego, again, I'm posting on TikTok, right? I'm doing all my normal stuff. And that video had done well the year before. So then I make a similar video at Petco Park. It's essentially the same video. I just happen to be now in San Diego. Again, not thinking much of it. Excuse me. And I post it, don't think a whole lot of it. And then the weird part happens. And at some point during that fall, it starts popping up my audio under different music, different remixes. And people start using it as this end of year recap sound. And for reasons I can't explain, I don't know who the first person to take that soundbite and put it under music. I really have no idea. One of the cool things about this is it was totally organic. Totally organic. I did not reach out to anybody. I didn't tell anybody to do it. It was totally organic. And next thing I knew, that sound was under multiple different pieces of music. There were sounds that were going just crazy as the final 6, 7, 8 weeks of the year went along, where people were using it to recap their years, and then the cap cut templates. And next thing I know, I mean, it was just going crazy viral, where there were literally tens of sounds with millions of views, or I should say millions of uses and views with my voice under it. And it just happened. I had celebrities using it, whether it was Drew Barrymore or Paris Hilton or Pitbull or Jennifer Gardner. The list goes on and on. There's been Coldplay, a lot of different uses. Um, and for whatever reason, it just caught on. And I would say in 2022, it was mega viral. And then of course in 23 and 24, I've done the same thing. I don't know that it's quite reached the crescendo of 2022, but it's definitely a thing. And as the year winds down, I see it more and more. So it's become sort of a thing. I don't know if you would call it a meme. I don't know if that's the appropriate term to really use for something like this. But that's basically the story. I mean, it was something that I once did in Amarillo. I did it when I was in San Diego. Didn't mean for it to happen, but it's been a pretty cool, interesting, and I would say weird twist to my social media, to my career. The funny thing is, it's the thing that people know most about me now, or know me from the most. Not necessarily baseball, not necessarily the Padres. So I would also say that one of the really interesting parts of this whole thing is I often see comments from people around the world that wonder why it says season, why it says, and with that, the 2024 season comes to an end. And people will comment saying, it's a year, not a season. Why does it say season? And the funny thing, and people, I wouldn't expect them to know this. The funny thing is that it's a season because I'm talking about the end of baseball season. So to me, that's always a really funny part of it, that this line has become so big. Um, and most people don't realize, I would say like 99% of people that use it have no idea that it's actually originally about the end of baseball season, which is why it's a season in the first place. But the line has worked, and I'm not gonna change it now. So yeah, I mean, overall, it's been a cool, interesting, weird, very unexpected but organic aspect of what I do, and I've certainly tried to lean into it as much as I can, for sure.
Do you have social media notifications on your phone?
I do not on TikTok, not
Yeah.
on Instagram, not on Twitter either. I don't do notifications. Yeah, I don't do the notifications for any of those. I have my email, my text, obviously, but no, I turn those off. Yeah, if not to sound braggadocious, but if I had my TikTok, especially if I had my notifications on, my phone would be buzzing nonstop. So no, I do not. I I don't get the notifications. I just go on the app and do what I got to do.
One thing that I have noticed that you do is sometimes on TikTok you'll hop on and just host a live, ask me some
Hmm.
questions, those kinds of things. How have you tried to utilize those as just let's have people get to know who I am so that you can kind of, give people a better insight into, hey, I do hear this voice. I'm looking for this little clip at the end of every year, but this is who
Yeah.
this person is.
Yeah, I've tried to utilize live a lot. I don't do it as much as I used to. I used to go live a lot. Nowadays I do it every once in a while. I did this thing on New Year's Eve, which was pretty successful, just to end the year, because that's become such a thing. But it's always good. I mean, look, whether it's live or really anyway, I think letting people know who you are, giving them some background, connecting with people, and that goes for social media and my job, covering the Padres. I think I've always tried to connect with people and let them, kind of inside my brain. And I think, a lot of people here in San Diego, feel like they know me, and they do. Whether that's because of how I talk on the radio, or that's because of how we interact at the ballpark or spring training or whatever it might be. So I would say, whether it's going live or something else, that connecting with people, having people feel like they really know you, I think is so incredibly important. I don't view being a broadcaster as like, oh, I'm doing this and they're fans. Like I don't view it like that at all. Um, I feel like the more you can connect with people and be friendly and have them relate to you and, have people really feel like you're in it with them, whatever sport you're broadcasting, I think that's a really important and sort of magical connection. So I put a big emphasis on that, whether it was on TikTok or it was, at the Gateway Grizzlies a decade ago. I think that's something I've always really valued.
And one of those things that you did is, I think one of the things that really got your TikTok rolling was the word game, where you snuck in
Yeah.
words on a live broadcast. But as much as that was kind of something fun to do, we talk about the value side of it. That
Mhm.
gave people an insight into the team that you were working for. I think it was Amarillo at the time,
Mhm. Mhm.
and kind of helped broaden that audience to somebody that listens. How important was it for you to do something that was completely off the beaten path, maybe a little bit from just a normal broadcast, and allow people to kind of understand what minor league baseball is all about?
Yeah, it was incredibly important. I think the interesting thing about my TikTok experience over the years, and we'll see if it gets banned now. Hopefully, I'm still able to post on TikTok in about a week. I don't know when you're posting this, but as we talk, that's looming. Um, but my TikTok experience has been really interesting because I've kind of gone through chapters of it, right? The initial chapter was I was at home in New York waiting for college sports to start up, and I was posting about now that's what I call music CDs. That's actually the first TikToks I ever posted, and they did well. I sometimes do wonder what would have happened had I stuck with the now that's what I call music CD reviews. But anyway, when I started doing sports again, then I started posting about my job, and that was sort of the next chapter of my TikTok. And then I went to Amarillo, and you're right. It went from posting things about my job and little intricacies and things that I thought people might find interesting to the word game, which was really, really big for a while. And then I got the job in San Diego and it evolved and I had to start posting about some different things. And then we had this whole thing with the line at the end of the year, which was a whole different thing. So I've gone through different, I would say, chapters or eras of my TikTok experience. But to your point, whether it was the word game, whether it was looking at something like I mean, one of my first uh, videos ever was, and I'll do it right here. You probably heard that on the mic, but was taking a windscreen, which I have on the mic I'm using right now, and telling people what this was. Right, like you would never think of it, but it's like think about how many people watch TV, watch sports, or watch whatever see this on a mic and actually have no idea what this foam thing is and what the purpose is. So a lot of my early TikToks were, hey, let me look at this thing and tell people what it is. What is a windscreen? What is this thing? Or what is a cough button? Or what is whatever it might be. I mean, that those are my original videos that would do really well. And then I started doing as I put the windscreen back on, the word game and things like that. So again, just doing things outside the box, taking a chance, right? Posting things, not knowing how well they're going to do, getting a little outside your comfort zone, right? Like you might think to yourself, I don't want to, say some random words in my broadcast or be distracted by a TikTok live during my broadcast or whatever it might be. You know, Again, it's like that thinking outside the box, battling through any self consciousness you might have about it. I think that's an important part to this as well. And look, all those videos, whether it was the word game or whether it was, um, any of the other, kind of first year or two videos I posted, they all were valuable and they all were just, there wasn't any grand plan with this stuff. It was just posting, seeing how it did, and going from there. So they were all important, including the word game stuff.
Certainly at the end of your minor league days, you weren't necessarily in anonymity based on the amount of followers that you had. But
Mhm.
when you are working through minor league baseball, how nice is it sometimes to think back and say, well, I'm glad that, a million people weren't listening when I make maybe a mistake or I stumble over my words. How
Yeah.
valuable is that to have those years to iron out some of those things before you get that big chance?
I think it's really important. And I think it's okay to make mistakes. And I think it's okay to learn and cut your teeth. And I talked about how, I wasn't very good for a long time. Um, I think it's really important. I think one thing that, people don't always realize, I think this goes for whether it's an employer, whether it's an agent that you're getting in front of. I think it's very important to be ready for the opportunity you get. Because I do think in our business, because it is performance based, because it's very hard to hide when maybe you're not ready for an opportunity or you're not developed enough for an opportunity. I think those things are hard to hide, right? And it's almost a little easy to get a little exposed. Now, you may not have what you think is the experience to do something, and you may go get a game doing whatever and go crush it and never look back. And look, you need those opportunities. I'm not telling people to turn down opportunities if they feel like they're not ready for them. Please, so be it, and go do what you got to do. But I do think it's important to be ready for things. Like, I'll give you a good example, and people ask me about agents a lot. Um, look, I think you have to be ready for that conversation, and your stuff, your material has to be ready to go be put in front of, an agent or an executive. Like, I do think there's such thing as getting places a little too early. And I know I feel like I experienced that, where I was always a very aggressive networker, very aggressive in trying to create opportunities. But you may not quite be ready for it. You may need to focus on getting better first. And again, that's not to say don't create the connection, but do be mindful of there is timing to this stuff. And back to your point, and I think this addresses what you're asking. I think it's important to use your time wherever you're working to get as good as you possibly can, and make mistakes when you can make mistakes, because I don't think certain places are going to be very forgiving of those mistakes. And I do think it's important to be ready when you get certain opportunities, be ready when you get put in front of certain people, because if you're not, I think it can be a little bit hard to maybe shake that initial perception. I mean, think about just how life works and how meeting people works. First impressions are important in anything you do. So, again, if you're a young broadcaster out there, I would say you really got to focus on just getting better and improving. And I think sometimes, including me, I was very guilty of this, as guilty as anybody, hand up, of trying to climb when I wasn't necessarily, from a broadcast standpoint, ready for those steps on the ladder. So, yeah, getting your reps in, making mistakes where you can make them, focusing on getting better, I think is so important. And quite frankly, I think it's something that a lot of us don't focus on, believe it or not, enough, as we're sort of coming up in the industry.
Yeah, that humility, I think, is something that's very valuable because,
Yeah.
particularly for getting to that major league level, you're not going to step in and be the number one broadcaster from day one. How do you describe what your job is like today as you go through another major league season coming up?
Yeah, my job is a great job here in San Diego. I mean, I'm super lucky for a bunch of reasons. Number one, this is a beautiful place. I mean, it's hard to beat San Diego. We have terrific fans. I mean, I truly think the best fans in baseball. I mean, the place is packed every night. Like, it's a great job in a great city, with a great fan base that really cares, which makes it just super fun for me day in, day out. I think the interesting part about my job is, obviously, during the season, primarily it is hosting our pregame show and our postgame show on the radio, which has been an interesting journey for me, because I was, primarily and only, obviously we've talked a lot about what the other things I did, but from a radio standpoint, look, I primarily was a play-by-play broadcaster, right? So coming to San Diego, where my primary job is not, play-by-play, was a change. And I think if I compare where I am now to my first season, I think I'm way better at my job now on the radio and doing this job. I've grown into it. I understand what it is. I understand how to do it. I understand how to host rather than do play by play. So that's my primary job during the season. But back to, parts of the conversation here, my job is way, way, way beyond just doing pre and post game. During spring training is a great example. I do a full spring training, 7 weeks in Arizona. My job primarily there is not to be on the radio. I do call into shows every day. I do host shows from there. But my primary job is to post on social media, create video content, do interviews, be in the clubhouse, and just be an all-encompassing source of spring training information for the radio station, for social media. And it's become a big part of what I do every spring, and a big enough part of what the radio station does where they send me out there for 7 weeks. So that's a really good example of, how I think my experience helped me to get this job, helped me now because, again, I'm doing the same things that I did back when I was with the Grizzlies in the Frontier League. I'm creating content. I'm doing interviews. I'm looking at things outside the broadcast booth beyond just hosting my pre and post game shows. And it creates a lot of value for everybody involved. So, during the season, there's a lot of elements to that as well. I mean, I'm doing a lot on social media. I'm doing a lot of video interviews, posting a lot of content. Obviously, it's pretty much not always, but, I'd say for the most part, I operate as I do get help. I don't want to make it like I don't get help from, particularly our program director, Adam, and I get help. But I would say for the most part, it's pretty one-man band-ish, right? Still to this day. So, I edit everything. I edit all the audio for my shows. I mean, there's some quick turnarounds and it's all me from prep to, I don't have somebody telling me how I should do things and what order I should do them or how long my segment should be. So, my job's pretty all encompassing. It's pre and post game host by title, but I would say it is all encompassing when you talk about video and content and social media and doing many of the things I've done for years. So that's pretty much the wide scope of what I do. It's broadcast for sure, but I'd say it's well beyond that, and I think it's all served me pretty well.
Last question I'll ask you. If you could give Sam Levitt a piece of advice going into his senior year of college at Northwestern, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, I've already used the "be where your feet are" line, so I got to think of something else. Let me give you something original. I would say my advice for myself, senior year of college, where I was very, very stressed on what I was going to do after college, and the whole thing in general of how I was going to do this. I would say to myself, be patient and enjoy it. And I think, as I've alluded to throughout this conversation, I think the early part of my career, I didn't enjoy it as much as I should. And I was not very patient, right? And I think it relates back to everything we've talked about. I was very, very focused early on moving up. And I think that hurt me because I wasn't enjoying what I was doing. I think it's something important to remember, whether you're broadcasting baseball or any other sport, or really doing anything in our business that involves sports. This is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be fun. Yes, it's serious. Yes, there are jobs on the line. Yes, it's a serious business. Absolutely. There's a lot of money at play as well, as far as what is people are getting paid to play and to coach and all of it. But it's supposed to be fun. And I think, if you're having fun, whether it's on the radio or on camera, I think that shows. And I think people can tell. So it's supposed to be fun. So, I wish I would have enjoyed it more early on, and have been patient and again focused on what was really important, which was getting better and improving and focusing each and every day on how I could be the best version of myself at the end of that game, at the end of that night. And I think the first 4 or 5 years of my career, I was extremely focused on how I was going to move up and how I was going to get out of the Frontier League and move into affiliated ball. And it just consumed me. And I think it made it not nearly as enjoyable as it should have. And I generally believe while networking is important, while focusing on what's next is important. I don't want to make it like it's not, but I do think those things will follow when you're focusing on the right things and you're focusing on yourself and getting better. So being patient and enjoying it more and having more fun and not being so worked up about what was going to be next, that would be my main piece of advice. I would say, Sam, relax. Enjoy it, be patient, and the rest will follow. So that would probably be what I would say to my senior year at Northwestern self.
Sam, this has been absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate your time. You've been very generous.
Absolutely, Michael. I appreciate you having me on, and you do terrific work as well on the broadcast side of things in your own right. So, best of luck to you, and happy to join the conversation anytime.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for watching. That wraps up this episode. Good night, everybody.